this talk is about the capitalism crisis. And the question is that an evolution or a revolution? And this comes from an assumption. The assumption is that it's not self. Come from the capitalistic system itself. It's not an external evaluation. We read in the last 5 years, at least in the last 5 years, in academic and scientific review about this crisis. More recently, this summer, we read on newspaper, on media about that crisis. And this declaration comes from the system itself, as I said before, and comes from the declaration of CEOs. This means that something happened in the system. And this means that probably the invisible hand disappeared. And why do we have to consider that invisible hand disappeared? Because the assumption on which the system is based, the profit distribution, came to a degeneration of this rule today. We know perfectly that the amount of money in the hand of few people is growing year by year. Today, the pyramid representing the distribution of wealth in the world is an incredible picture. How we have less than 10 people having been reached more than half of the world population. And this number is decreasing year by year. This means that something happened in the system. This means that something is wrong in the system. And we have to take this as an assumption. I'm not an economist, I'm not a politic, I'm a jurist. So the question to me is, how can we manage this failure, this crisis? And which could be the approach to find out a solution to this system? A reaction came from the system itself. This is an endogenous reaction. Let's take an evaluation about the last reaction in the world. This year we received the declaration of the CEO Business Roundtable in the US. This declaration is about how to change the system in order to balance that degeneration. And we received around the world sectors, the B Corp system, for instance, and the declaration from compañías based in Latin America, B Corps around the world, is about how to change the system. And last but not least, because we are talking about investors, how is changing the approach of investors to the markets? The famous declaration from Larry Finn, CEO of BlackRock, about how to generate impact through investments is a key on this evaluation. Something new happened recently. We received the SDGs. Every presentation around the world showed this picture, this one of the round ship one. But we are very familiar about SDGs today. And SDGs do represent a paradigm shift or not? Is that enough to change the market or not? Is it a tool or this is a change maker? This is the question. Today, investors, businesses and managers use these SDGs as a way to represent how sustainable they are. But who measures this sustainability? And how can we consider that sustainability as something strongly linked to the goal of a company? This is the point. And there are some risks. I come back to my nature as a jurist. I have to consider the risk of this change. I have to consider that some of this approach could represent a gender washing, a greenwashing, a social washing. Investment to represent that we are good and we take care about the market or the necessity or the needs of communities. But this is more linked probably to a marketing or advertising approach than a change into the business. And finally, we have to consider that this could become an impact bubble. If all is impact, nothing is impact. This is the truth. If all become impactful, we have to consider that the money will flow to this sector because it's attractive for investors. But if there are any rule to represent how to draft this impact, this will become the end of the system. Recently we heard about, and we lived the crisis, the bubble from internet companies, the real estate bubble. And this is the same. If there are not rules, investment could become a bubble, a negative return. At the same time, we have to consider, as we can drive the change, which are the paradigm shift. This is a personal evaluation, obviously, but this evaluation is based on the legal community approach, the global legal community approach to this field. First of all, we need taxonomy, definition. We have to be sure that when we discuss about impact, when we discuss about benefit corporation, when we discuss about measurements, we are discussing about the same things. Secondly, we need standards, we need rules. The problem is that, this is a tricky point, the problem is that too many rules represent bureaucracy. And so we have to consider this step to be taken in the lightest possible way. We have to be sure about common rules, not too much and not too strict. We have to create frameworks. This is the point. The least common denominator is to be set under these rules. But the player in this market have to play freely, because this is a market at the end of the day. We need measuring, we need accountability. We need to demonstrate this approach. This is the point. And finally, we have to create incentives for these sectors. This is another point that is under discussion, but in different jurisdictions there are incentives to represent or to support the approach to this market. Some inspiration coming from something that we have. We do not have to invent anything. We have just to take in mind, under legal point of view, that there are different experiences around the world that we could take as an example, very briefly. We have the experience of social enterprise in Europe, and there are rules in that laws that represent perfectly this new approach, this hybrid approach to business. The need to create a balance into payment for employees, the need to create a stakeholdership approach to the governance, the need to be open and transparent to the market, representing differently the balance of this company, representing the way that this company uses the money for non-financial activities. At the same time, we have the example of B Corp or B Corporation. This is a brand new approach to the market. Most of you knows how it's driven, this approach. But this comes another time from a new way to measure the impact created for a benefit, a common benefit. And the evaluation is about how a company acts differently in the market, not only to maximize profit, but also at the same time to generate benefit for communities, for people, for workers. The other example comes from cooperatives, and the strongest approach that cooperatives had is democracy in governance. And creating this democracy, one head, one vote, this represents a way to share decision. Probably is too much in some sector, but this could be an inspiring point in order to hear how can we create hybrid entities in order to drive impact businesses. And coming to profit with purpose, probably this is the future. Making profit with a purpose, with a specific purpose, linked to the SDGs, for instance. And this is a way to move a step beyond from the simple evaluation of SDGs. Create companies running business in order to make profits pursuing a specific goal coming from the SDGs. And the other end of business are investments. So, from legal entities to investments. Today, we have a lot of definition to represent a different way to drive money into business. Principal PRI investment, FRI, ESG, these are the way to represent how money could be invested differently in the market. But the approach is a negative approach in some way, not linked to the use of this money, but because it's negative, the evaluation. I invest in a sector, in a company that do not develop business using children, that do not pollute as an ordinary company. So it's a negative way. And how can we be driven to the center of these targets, where we have the definition of impact investments? We have to consider how today is defined impact investing. And very briefly, these are the three pillars that today are represented in the literature, that could represent impact investing in the literature. Intentionality, the decision to invest money in that specific sector in order to pursue a social or a climate goal. Measurability, the need to measure the social return. So financial return is quite easy to be, it's easy to be measured. There are global methods to do that. But measurability of social return is brand new. And finally, this is the most controversial at the moment, additionality. Additionality means that money are driven into undercapitalized sector. This means that that money could leverage sectors that today are not invested by mainstream investors. This is the highest risk for an investor. This means that the investors has to look for new sector, social sector, in order to develop a beneficial return for communities. And this is probably the most relevant point today. Today we agree on most of the topics that are under the table in order to evaluate the impact economy. Do we agree on the need to drive societal challenges? If we discuss about inequality, poverty, health, populism, we consider that as a problem to be solved. At the same time, we need these transversal challenges. These are challenges that are common globally, in different parts of the world. And megatrends, if we discuss about the needs of the planet Earth in the next 30 years, we know that the growth, the demographic growth, will generate huge problems, from need of food for these people to the needs of health, protection, insurance, etc. So the growth of the growth of the demography represents a need to be solved. And we agree on a common language. SDGs is a turning point, is a milestone, because it represents a new way to be aware about the needs of the planet Earth, and the needs are common in different parts of the world. Taxonomy, this is a brand new information, the information from this week. In the EU, it's almost close the request of information from the market about how to define the climate change investment sector in order to be aligned on the taxonomy. And finally, momentum. This is the most relevant to me. Today we discuss at the same time in different parts of the world about the same problem. And we are evaluating at the same time in different countries, different jurisdictions, the same solution. And at the same time, we are evaluating to create a global approach to this change. I mean, I'm an Italian lawyer. I'm here in Ecuador to discuss about that. And we discussed the same thing, and In 2 minutes, we are on the same page. This demonstrates that this is the momentum to solve this problem and to approach this topic in the same way. How can we be innovative? How can we react to the invisible hand, procrastination? Do we have to consider a sort of invisible heart of the market in order to wait for a new balancement of the capitalistic economy? Or we have to consider an intergovernmental or supranational support in order to drive this change? In this case, I'm referring to SDGs, for instance, or organization approaching the impact sector as the GSG, the Global Steering Group, the former G7 Task Force for Impact Investments. This GSG will have next November the annual conference in Santiago del Chile, introducing the Impact Act, first attempt to create a frame around the impact economy. And at the end of the day, to be innovative is not relevant to us consider a change of paradigm into the approach to the market. Can we consider that moving from a two-step economy into one-step economy could solve this problem? Two-step means that we run the business to make profits, and then we run philanthropy or CSR activities. This is a two-step approach. Are we sure that it's not time to develop a one-step economy, to run business that at the same time could produce profit for shareholders, but take into consideration the societal challenges we were talking before? Is the right time? And I think that being a jurist, we need a sort of taxonomy. We need to identify the least common denominator in order to create the floor. And the floor is the basis in order to generate this new business, this new market approach. Freely, but at least agreeing on this least common denominator. And this is the key. This is the point in order to start to create a global framework to drive the growth of impact economy. Thank you.